Welcome back to the deep dive. Grab your coffee or your tea or whatever gets your synapses firing, because today we are opening a file that, honestly, it feels a little bit like we're stepping into a cold case unit.
It does have that vibe, doesn't it?
It really does. But the stakes here are, they're way higher than just solving a crime. We aren't just talking about forensic evidence. We are talking about history, theology, and the very definition of what it means to be perfect.
It's a fascinating topic, and you're right about the cold case feeling. We are, in a sense, revisiting a crime scene from thousands of years ago, but the implications are still being debated in theological circles today. It really touches on one of the most sensitive nerves in religious philosophy.
Absolutely. So let's lay it out for everyone. We are looking at a specific incident in the life of Moses, or Musa, peace be upon him. Now, usually when we talk about prophets in the monotheistic traditions, we're talking about figures of immense patience, guidance, moral clarity. These are basically the people who tell us not to commit crimes.
Correct. They are the paragons, the role models.
But here, we have a moment, and this is before his prophethood was fully established, which is key, where Moses kills a man, specifically a Coptic man, an Egyptian.
To put it bluntly, we have a dead body, we have a prophet standing over it, and... well, we have what looks like a confession.
And that is the core conflict we're digging into today. How does a major religion reconcile that act of homicide with the doctrine of isma, or infallibility?
Right.
If a prophet is supposed to be protected from major sins, how do you explain a dead body lying in the street at his feet? It seems like a massive contradiction.
That is the question. And to navigate this, we were doing a deep dive into a very specific, very dense source text. It's titled Vindicating Moses, Defense of Prophetic Infallibility Regarding the Copt.
Which sounds like a legal brief you'd find at a courthouse.
It essentially is. It's a piece of apologetics, or what's known in Islamic scholarship as a response to shubhat.
Shubhat. I've heard that term before. Can you break that down for us?
Sure. It translates to doubts, suspicions, or specious arguments. These are the objections raised by critics, skeptics, philosophers, maybe rival theologians against the character of the prophets.
These are the gotcha questions.
Exactly. They're the toughest questions. So this text we're looking at is effectively the defense attorney's closing argument. It takes the prosecution's case that Moses is a murderer, and it just systematically dismantles it to argue for his absolute innocence.
Okay, so our mission today is to sit in the jury box. We're going to unpack this defense. We're going to look at what I'm calling the anatomy of the punch. We're getting really granular with the physics of it all.
I have to. The details matter immensely here.
And we're going to look at the psychology of guilt. And, we're going to try to answer a question that really stumped me when I first read this. Why would a person who is supposedly innocent beg for forgiveness?
It's a deep question. It really forces us to redefine our entire vocabulary around words like guilt, accident, and sin.
Okay, let's set the scene. We need to transport ourselves back in time. We are in ancient Egypt, Memphis perhaps, or one of those major cities.
Particularly Memphis, were one of the major hubs of the Pharaonic Empire, yeah.
It's hot. It's dusty. And the political tension is thick. You have the Israelites, who are the oppressed underclass, and the Copts, the ruling class of Pharaoh. And for the narrative, we are relying on what's found in the Quran, in Surah Al-Qasas, verses 15 through 17.
Correct. That's the primary source for the event itself.
So walk us through the incident. What exactly happened on the ground?
So the source describes Moses entering the city, but the timing is absolutely crucial. The text says he entered at a time of unawareness from its people.
Unawareness. That's a bit cryptic. Does that mean it's like 3 in the morning?
It could be. It implies a time when the streets were empty and people weren't paying attention. The scholars, they debate this. It could be the dead of night, or it could be that midday siesta time in a hot climate when everyone is indoors seeking shade. The point is, the city is asleep or distracted. It sets the stage for a private, isolated encounter. There are no witnesses, at least not at first.
So he's walking through these empty, quiet streets, and he just stumbles upon a fight.
Right. He finds 2 men fighting, and the text is very, very specific about who they are. This isn't just a random bar brawl between 2 strangers.
Identity politics is already at play here.
Exactly. The source is clear. One man is described as being from his Shia, which means his faction or his people, so an Israelite. The other is from his enemy, meaning a Copt, one of Pharaoh's people. So right away, you have the oppressed versus the oppressor.
And we know Moses, even before he was a prophet, he had this intense sense of justice. He sees his guy, the Israelite, getting beaten up.
Yes. The Israelite calls out to him for help. He's in distress and seeks aid against the Copt. So Moses intervenes, and this is where the action happens incredibly fast. We almost have to slow it down like a film. The verse says Moses struck him or punched him, and the man died immediately. The phrase used, Fekada Alehi, it implies it was instantaneous. It finished him off.
One punch.
One strike. That's all it took.
Okay, let's just freeze frame right there. Moses steps in, bam, the guy drops dead. Now, normally if you win a fight, especially against an enemy, against the oppressor, you might feel a rush of adrenaline, maybe a little bit of triumph. Yeah, take that kind of feeling.
You'd think so.
But the source points out that Moses' reaction is, well, it's weird. It's not what you'd expect.
It's the complete opposite of triumph. It's horror. He doesn't cheer. He doesn't, check the guy's pockets or anything. He immediately says, this is from the work of Satan. Indeed, he is a clear, misleading enemy.
He blames Satan right away. Not the man, not himself, but Satan.
Immediately. That's his first utterance. And then he turns to God. He prays, "My Lord, indeed I have wronged myself, so forgive me." And the text confirms God forgave him. Instantly.
And he caps it all off with a vow, right?
He does. He says, "My Lord, for the favor you bestowed upon me, I will never be an assistant to the criminals." So if you look at his internal monologue, his own perspective, he views this outcome as a total disaster.
A spiritual catastrophe.
Absolutely. He is devastated by what just happened.
Okay, so that's the incident. We have a body, a panicked Moses, and a prayer for forgiveness. Now let's bring in the prosecution. Because if I'm a critic or just a skeptic sitting here reading this, I'm looking at this and saying, guys, come on. He killed a guy and then he admitted he was wrong. This is an open and shut case.
That is the surface reading, for sure. And that is exactly where the concept of Isma infallibility comes under fire.
Right, this idea of Isma.
The expert consensus in the source is that prophets are protected from committing kaber, or major sins, and murder is, without a doubt, a major sin. So if this was murder, the entire theological theory of infallibility it collapses.
So the stakes are that high. It's not just about one man's actions.
They're foundational. If the vessel of revelation is flawed to the point of being a murderer, then the revelation itself gets questioned. It's a domino effect.
So the text we're looking at, it lays out three main objections. The Shubhah that critics use to attack this idea of infallibility. And I want to play devil's advocate for a minute because these objections make a lot of sense on the surface. Let's start with objection number one, the dilemma of regret.
This is a classic logic trap, a dilemma. The objection goes like this. Look at the victim, the Copt. Either he deserved to die or he didn't. There's no third option.
Okay, it's a binary choice.
If he deserved to die, let's say for the sake of argument, he was a war criminal, a known tyrant, a threat to life, then why did Moses call the act Satan's work? Why did he say, I wronged myself? You don't apologize for carrying out justice.
Right. If a police officer stops an active shooter, they don't fall to their knees and say, oh God, Satan made me do it. They might feel trauma, sure, but they don't call the act itself evil. They see it as a necessary, just act.
Exactly. But now let's take the other side of the coin. If the Copt didn't deserve to die, then Moses committed a crime. He killed an innocent man, or at the very least, a man who didn't warrant execution in a street fight.
So it feels like a lose-lose situation. Either he was wrong to kill him, which would be murder, or he was wrong to apologize for it, which implies he was confused or doubted his own actions.
Precisely. The objection claims that Moses is caught in a contradiction. His actions and his words don't align, no matter how you look at it.
Okay, that's a strong point. What's objection number two?
This one focuses on the legal status of the victim. The text calls the Copt an enemy.
Right, an enemy of his.
Yes. And in classical jurisprudence, the term enemy often implies a harbi, which means a combatant, someone with whom you are at war.
Like an enemy soldier on a battlefield.
If he is a combatant, then his blood is technically permissible in the context of war. You are allowed to kill an enemy soldier in battle. So, the critics then ask, why is Moses asking for forgiveness for a permissible act?
It's the same logic loop again. If I shoot an enemy soldier on the battlefield, I don't go back to my commanding officer and beg for forgiveness for the act itself.
You might need counseling, but you don't repent for it as a sin.
Exactly. So the objection is saying, by asking for forgiveness, Moses is practically admitting that this wasn't a valid, permissible killing. His repentance becomes the evidence of his crime.
It's like admitting guilt proves the guilt. The act of repentance itself is being used as Exhibit A for the prosecution.
And the third objection, this one is about the weapon, or I guess the lack thereof. Critics look at the result of death and say, well, you killed him. But the defense notes that a single strike with a fist, technically called a wax, doesn't typically kill a grown man.
Right, so the objection goes, if it was just a freak accident, if it was manslaughter at best, why the heavy, soul-crushing repentance? You don't beg for forgiveness for a freak accident in the same way you do for a sin.
If I trip on the sidewalk and accidentally bump into someone, I say, whoops, sorry. I don't fall to my knees and say, my Lord, I have wronged my soul, save me from this darkness. The intensity of his regret seems to imply an intensity of intent.
That is the prosecution's case in a nutshell. The body language, the verbal regret, the lethal result, it all seems to point to a major moral failing.
It's a strong case. I mean, if I saw that evidence presented in a courtroom, I'd be swaying toward guilty. But this is why we're here. We are here to see the defense's rebuttal. And this source text, it gets incredibly nerdy in the best possible way. It starts with linguistics.
This is the anatomy of a punch section, and it's fascinating. The entire defense, or at least the foundation of it, rests on one specific Arabic word used in the Quran to describe the act, wax.
Wax. W-A-K-Z.
Correct. Wakazahu Musa, Moses struck him with a wax.
Now, in most English translations, this often just says he struck him or he punched him. But you're saying the original Arabic is way more specific.
Yeah. So much more specific. The source provides a fantastic breakdown of the semantics here. It compares wax to similar words like lax, lax, and lad. These are all words for striking, but they mean different things.
Okay, so let's differentiate. What is lax? You mentioned that one earlier.
So lax usually refers to striking with the fist, but specifically to the chin or the jaw. It's collecting someone on the chin.
So that's a haymaker. That's a knockout punch.
Yeah.
The intent there is to incapacitate.
Right. That is a strike intended to cause damage. Wax, however, is defined differently in the classical lexicons. It specifically refers to striking the chest, often with the full palm or the side of the fist, not a closed fist punch.
A chest shove or a palm strike.
Essentially, yes. Some of the key definitions in the source explicitly define wax as pushing or repelling. It's a strike designed to create distance. Think of a stiff arm in American football.
Or like when you're in a crowded bar and someone gets right up in your face and your instinct is just to shove them back. You aren't trying to knock their teeth out, you're just trying to get them out of your personal space.
Exactly. The source emphasizes that the mechanics of a wax are for the purpose of daf, which means defense and repelling. The intent is not qatl killing. The very choice of the word implies a defensive, not an offensive, action.
So, if I'm a forensic investigator looking at this, the weapon used, an open hand or chest shove, does not match the result, which was death. There's a huge disconnect there.
A massive disconnect. And that leads to the central argument of the defense, intent versus outcome. The source argues emphatically that Moses never intended to kill. His intention was to stop a fight, to defend the weaker party.
But the guy died. I mean, that's the bottom line.
He did, but the source says the strike coincided with the man's appointed time of death, or his ajal.
That's a very theological phrase, coincided with his time. It sounds a little bit like it was just destiny.
It is, but think of it in a biological sense, too. Have you ever heard of those tragic cases in sports where a baseball player gets hit by a pitch in the chest at the exact wrong millisecond of a heartbeat, and they go into cardiac arrest?
Commotio cordis. Yes, it's an absolute freak accident. A non-lethal force that has a lethal outcome because of perfect, tragic timing.
That is essentially what the source is arguing happened here. The physical force used a wax was not inherently lethal. It shouldn't have killed him. But because it happened to be that man's ajal, his divinely appointed moment of death, the biological result was cardiac arrest or whatever it was.
So Moses provides the shove, but the death is almost a separate event that was going to happen anyway, and the shove was just the catalyst.
Legally and morally, yes. The source uses this to argue that it wasn't murder. It wasn't even manslaughter in the traditional sense of culpable negligence. It was a freak occurrence, an accident of the highest order.
And the source has evidence for this accidental theory, right? It's not just relying on the definition of one word.
No, it builds a cumulative case. First, there's the logical evidence we discussed. If Moses, who was raised in the court of Pharaoh and was a strong, healthy man living in a rough time, actually wanted to kill an enemy, he wouldn't use a chest shove.
Right. He'd grab a rock, a stick, a sword, something.
Exactly. Using a wax is evidence in itself that the intent was separation, not execution. But the source also brings in a very powerful piece of scriptural evidence, a hadith, a saying of Prophet Muhammad, to back this up.
Okay, so what does the hadith say?
The Prophet Muhammad, centuries later, is recorded as saying Moses only killed the one he killed from Pharaoh's people by mistake.
By mistake. Katan. That seems pretty definitive for the believers, doesn't it?
For the defense, it's the ultimate trump card. It's a prophetic confirmation of the accident theory. And the context of that hadith is actually a warning against sedition, highlighting that Moses' act, even though it was unintentional, caused him immense distress. The Quran even says later, we saved you from distress.
Okay, so we have the physical act of shove.
Yeah.
We have the intent defense. We have the confirmation from a later prophet. It was a mistake. But I still have a problem with the why. Why did he even get involved? It's a street fight. Just walk away, Moses.
Because, according to the source, he couldn't. The source states that aiding the oppressed is a debt in all religions. It is a fundamental duty in all laws, divine or human.
The Good Samaritan law on steroids.
Well, even stronger. Moses saw a man from his oppressed community, a slave class, being attacked by a member of the powerful ruling class. He had a moral obligation to stop the aggression. The source argues that if he had walked away, that would have been the sin of omission.
So the motivation was righteous. He was trying to do the right thing, to stop an injustice.
The motivation was pure, the result was tragic, and that disconnect is what drives the rest of the theological discussion.
Right, because this brings us back to that very strange Satan comment. If his motivation was pure and the death was a freak accident, why does he immediately say, this is from the work of Satan?
It's a jarring statement, isn't it? It feels out of place with the accident theory.
It is. If I'm doing CPR on someone and they die, I don't say this is Satan's work. I say, I tried my best, but it wasn't enough. Is Moses trying to shift the blame here? Is he saying, the devil made me do it?
That's the cynical reading, of course. But the source offers three very nuanced interpretations that completely clear Moses of admitting to a sin or of blame shifting. The key is asking, when he says this, what exactly is he pointing to?
Okay, let's break them down. What's interpretation A?
Interpretation A is that this refers to the fighting itself, the conflict, the very sight of two people brawling in the street. That chaos, that violence, that oppression is the work of Satan. Moses stepped into a satanic situation. He didn't create it. He's commenting on the scene before him.
That makes a lot of sense. This whole mess is Satan's work. I can buy that. It's a commentary, not a confession. What's interpretation B?
Interpretation B is, well, it's provocative. It suggests this refers to the victim, the Copt himself, as in, this man is a result of Satan's work.
Whoa, so he's standing over the dead body and saying, this guy was bad news anyway.
In a theological sense, yes. He's identifying the victim as an agent of corruption and oppression. The man was an enemy, an active participant in Pharaoh's tyrannical system. Moses is effectively saying, this tragic outcome happened because this man was a product of an evil satanic system.
That feels a little convenient, doesn't it? Like, I killed him, but hey, he was a bad apple.
It does if you view it as a modern excuse. But if you view it as a theological statement about cause and effect, it's Moses recognizing that the Copt's aggression was the root cause of the entire tragedy. If the Copt hadn't been attacking the Israelite, none of this would have ever happened.
Fair point. It reframes the root of the problem.
And what about interpretation C?
Interpretation C turns the lens inward, but not to the act of killing. It suggests that this refers to the anger Moses felt.
Yes. Moses, seeing this injustice, might have felt a flash of righteous rage. The source suggests that this is from the work of Satan, refers to that emotional spike. The anger was the satanic influence, even if the intent to defend was noble. Anger, especially when it leads to physical action, is often linked to satanic influence in these texts.
So he's not saying, my punch was Satan's work. He's saying, my loss of cool, that flash of rage, was Satan's work.
Precisely. It's an incredibly fine distinction. He is critiquing his own emotional composure, his lack of perfect patience, not the morality of his intervention.
Which brings us to the part of the source that I found the most psychologically complex, the apology, the prayer. He says, I wronged myself.
Rabbi inni zalamtu nafsi. My lord, indeed, I have wronged myself.
I have to be honest, if I'm on a jury and I hear that, that sounds like a confession. I mean, game over. Why would an innocent person say that?
This is what the source calls the I wronged myself puzzle. And to understand the defense's answer, we have to split the concept of wrong into two distinct categories: legal wrong and spiritual wrong.
Okay. Legal wrong seems pretty clear. Did he break the law of the land?
Well, the source suggests he might have been in a legal gray area. There's what we could call a timing of law issue. At this point in his life, Moses hadn't received the divine command to fight Pharaoh's people.
He wasn't a general yet. He was just a guy, a private citizen.
Right. In religious history, permissions for war or combat are usually specific and divinely sanctioned. At this stage, Moses was acting on his own initiative. So even killing a bad guy who was oppressing someone might not have been authorized by God yet. It was procedurally out of order.
So he jumped the gun, in a sense.
Exactly. And then there is the concept of mustamon. Even if someone is from an enemy nation, if they are within a city under a state of civil order, they have a kind of protected status.
You can't just enact vigilante justice on people in the street, even if they're doing something wrong.
Correct. It violates the civil order and can lead to chaos. So from a purely procedural standpoint, there's a technical foul here. But the deeper explanation, and this is the one the source really leans into, is the spiritual nuance. This introduces the concept of khilaf al-Awla.
Khilaf al-Awla. Can you translate that for me?
It translates roughly and a bit clumsily to leaving the better option.
Leaving the better option. Okay.
This concept is absolutely critical for understanding the psychology of prophets in these texts. For a normal person like you or me, our moral compass is usually good versus bad or legal versus illegal.
Right. Did I steal the car? No. Okay, I'm a good person. I'm good for the day.
Exactly. But for a prophet, the scale is completely different. Their scale is good versus best. Khilaf al-Awla means doing something that isn't a sin, it isn't forbidden, but it wasn't the most perfect, the most excellent way to handle the situation.
So in this alleyway with the two men fighting, what was the best option that Moses supposedly left?
Well, perhaps he could have separated them verbally. Maybe a commanding shout would have been enough. Perhaps he could have simply pulled the Israelite away from the fight instead of shoving the Egyptian. Perhaps he could have shouted for the city guards. By choosing to strike physically, even in defense, he abandoned the preferable course. He chose the good option, defending the oppressed, but not the best option, which would have achieved the same result with no harm.
And because he is a prophet, or a future prophet, he holds himself to this unbelievably microscopic standard of perfection.
That's the absolute key. Think of it like a world-class neurosurgeon. If they are in surgery and they make a tiny, non-lethal slip, maybe they nick a vein that requires one extra stitch to fix, they might go home that night and just beat themselves up over it, saying, I failed, I was sloppy, I wronged myself.
Whereas if I'm doing first aid on the side of the road and I stop the bleeding but leave a messy scar, I'm walking away thinking, hey, I'm a hero, I saved a life.
Exactly. The surgeon feels guilt because their standard is absolute perfection. You feel pride because your standard is good enough. Moses is the surgeon. He isn't confessing to a crime. He is confessing to falling short of his own standard of absolute perfection in that moment.
The source also compares us to Adam, doesn't it?
Yes. Adam and Eve, after eating from the tree, they say, Lord, we have wronged ourselves. The source argues this isn't necessarily a confession of a criminal act in the legal sense, but an admission of helplessness. It's a way of saying, I relied on my own strength, my own fist, my own judgment, and look what happened. I was cut off from relying solely on you.
That reframes the whole thing. I wronged myself doesn't mean I'm a murderer. It means I put myself in a terrible position, or I exposed myself to distress and grief.
I exposed myself to a situation that could be used against me by my enemies. He preemptively repents because he knows he skipped a step in the divine protocol of perfection.
This actually flips the narrative on guilt completely. Section 6 of our deep dive gets into what the source calls the virtue of guilt, which sounds like an oxymoron.
It does. But the source argues that admitting guilt when you barely did anything wrong is actually a mankaba, a virtue, or a great merit.
It's a spiritual flex in a weird way.
In a spiritual sense, yes. The source draws this incredibly sharp contrast between the reaction of Moses and the reaction of Iblis, or Satan, to their respective errors.
Okay, what's the contrast?
Satan sinned. He disobeyed a direct and clear command from God to bow to Adam. And what did he do when confronted? He argued. He justified his actions. He was arrogant.
He said, I'm better than him. I made a fire. He's made a clay. He doubled down on his pride.
Right. Now look at Moses. He made a mistake, an accident in the heat of the moment. And what did he do? He humbled himself completely. He didn't say, well, the guy was a jerk, so he deserved it. He didn't say it was his own fault.
Okay.
He immediately said, Lord, forgive me. I wronged myself.
So the reaction to the error is what defines the character, not the error itself.
Exactly. And the source makes it clear that this is a pattern for all prophets. It lists other prophets to prove this is a recurring theme. Noah asks for forgiveness just for asking God about his son during the flood. Abraham asks for forgiveness. David and Solomon seek forgiveness. The source notes that Prophet Muhammad sought forgiveness more than 70 times a day.
And Muslims consider him the most perfect human being to ever live. So asking for forgiveness isn't an admission of, I just robbed a bank.
No. The takeaway here is that istighfar, asking for forgiveness, is an act of worship. Ibadah. It's not just a transaction to erase a sin you've committed. It's a ritual of status. It's a constant affirmation of your dependency on the divine and your own imperfection.
It's like the cleaner the window, the more you notice a single speck of dust.
That is a perfect analogy. Their sensitivity to error is so heightened because their closeness to the divine is so intense. What we wouldn't even notice, they see as a major blemish.
Okay, so we've handled the punch, we've handled the apology and the psychology of regret, but now we have to handle the confrontation, because this story doesn't end in that alleyway. Years later, Moses goes back to Egypt. He stands in front of Pharaoh, and Pharaoh brings this up.
The Deline controversy. This is the climax of the legal battle, really.
It's the courtroom drama scene. Pharaoh basically looks at Moses and says, "Hey, aren't you the guy who killed that Copt all those years ago? You're ungrateful. We raised you, and then you became a criminal."
He's trying to discredit Moses' message by attacking his character. It's a classic ad hominem attack. How can you be a prophet if you're a murderer?
And Moses replies with a line that has confused translators for centuries. In Surah Ash-Shu'ara, verse 20, he says, "I did it then while I was of the Daleen."
Wa ana mina al-dalin.
Now, I looked this up. If you open a standard dictionary, or even if you just read the first chapter of the Quran, Al-Fatiha, Daleen translates to the strayers, the misguided, or the lost.
Right. In Al-Fatiha, it says, "Guide us to the straight path, not the path of those who have earned your anger, nor of those who go astray." Al-Dalin.
So, did Moses just admit to Pharaoh, "Yeah, I was spiritually lost and misguided when I did that"? Because that sounds like he's handing the win to Pharaoh on a silver platter. Yes, I admitted I was a sinner back then.
It does sound exactly like that in a simple English translation. And this is where the prosecution usually rests their case. See? He admitted it. But the source text we're studying takes us on a masterclass linguistic deep dive here. The expert explains that the Arabic root dal is incredibly versatile and polysemous. Context is king.
The source lists 4 specific meanings for dal in this context that have absolutely nothing to do with being a sinner or an unbeliever. Let's vet them. What's meaning number 1?
Ignorance or unawareness. The source argues that when Moses said he was from the Daleen, he meant, "I was ignorant of the outcome."
Meaning, I had no idea he would die from that push.
Exactly. I struck him, but I was dull. I was unaware that a punch like that could possibly kill him. It's an admission of factual ignorance, not moral corruption.
Or it could be ignorance of the divine law.
Yes, that's the other shade of this meaning. I was unaware that this was forbidden at that time, or I hadn't received the revelation yet. So it means I was of those who didn't know better, not I was of those who rebelled against God.
Okay, that holds water. It's a plausible defense. What's meaning number 2?
Mistake or unintentional act. Here, the word dull functions as a synonym for the Arabic word khata, which means error or mistake. So the sentence would translate to, "I did it then, and I was one of those who made a mistake."
Like saying, I was in error.
Yes. But again, in English, error can be moral or factual. In this context, it's operational. I messed up the procedure. It was an accident. It's a statement about the nature of the act, not his spiritual state.
Meaning number 3. This one's interesting. Forgetfulness.
Linguistically, to stray from a memory is to forget it. The source suggests Moses meant he forgot himself in the heat of the moment. He lost his mindfulness, his presence of mind.
He reacted rather than responded. An impulsive act.
Exactly. He strayed from his usual state of calm and composure. He's saying, I wasn't thinking straight. I lost myself for a second.
And finally, meaning number 4. This is the one that felt the most human to me when I read it.
Perplexity.
Perplexity, as in confusion.
Yes. The root dal can mean being confused, stunned, or lost in a situation. The source argues Moses was saying, I was stunned by the situation I found myself in.
I love this one because you can just picture it. He's in a dark alley. It's quiet. Adrenaline's pumping. He intervenes. There's a quick shove, and then a man is dead in his feet. He's killed someone by accident. He's terrified. He is literally lost in the fog of what just happened.
Exactly. He was overwhelmed by the sheer suddenness and the tragic outcome of the event. He didn't have a protocol for this. So when he tells Pharaoh, I was of the Daleen, he's not saying I was a bad guy. He's saying, I was confused, I was panicked, I was human.
So he is effectively and brilliantly denying Pharaoh's accusation. Pharaoh wanted to brand him a murderer and a criminal. Moses skillfully rebrands the act as a tragic error committed out of surprise and confusion.
It's a complete rebuttal, not a confession. He's saying, I didn't do it out of malice, and I didn't do it as a criminal act. I did it because I was overwhelmed by a situation I didn't create.
It totally changes the entire tone of that verse. It goes from a weak confession of sin to a powerful defense of his own humanity and lack of malice.
It does, and it shuts Pharaoh down. Because Pharaoh can't argue with it was an accident. He can only argue with it was a crime. Moses took the crime part off the table.
So let's synthesize this entire defense. Let's bring it all home.
Right?
We started this hour with a dead body, a prophet, and a lot of very uncomfortable questions.
And we've walked through the forensic, the linguistic, and the theological evidence provided by the source text.
We found that the physical act was a wax a defensive shove designed to repel, not an execution blow designed to kill.
We found that the regret was an act of profound spiritual humility, the hierarchy of piety, where a prophet apologizes for leaving the best option, not for actually committing a crime.
And we found that the supposed confession to Pharaoh, using the word dalin, was actually a statement of perplexity, ignorance, and accidental error, not an admission of moral failure or spiritual misguidance.
Put it all together, and the defense argues that the doctrine of isma, or infallibility, stands firm. Moses remains a moral paragon, but he becomes a much more relatable, much more human one.
That's the aha moment for me in all of this. Instead of seeing a man trying to cover up a crime, you see a man who is terrified by his own strength, by the potential for unintended consequences. You see a man who is so desperate to be good that a freak accident destroys him emotionally.
And that leads to the real takeaway from this entire deep dive. It's the difference between how we judge ourselves and how prophets judge themselves.
Explain that. What do you mean?
Well, we as normal people often try to justify our intentional bad deeds. We say things like, I had to lie to protect them, or it was just a white lie, or he deserved what I said to him. We lower the moral bar to clear ourselves.
We are excellent defense attorneys for our own egos.
We absolutely are. But prophets, the source shows they do the opposite. They raise the bar so impossibly high that even an accident, even a good action that wasn't the best action, causes them immense distress. Their accidents cause them more pain and guilt than our intentional crimes cause us.
That is profound. It's a complete inversion of the modern ego.
It is. It's about radical accountability. Moses didn't have a lawyer. He didn't have a PR team to spin the story for him. He immediately turned to God and said, I messed up. Forgive me. Fix me.
And God's response was immediate forgiveness.
Because the heart was right, even if the hand slipped.
So here's a final thought for you to chew on as we wrap up this deep dive. We've spent the better part of an hour breaking down how a prophet was spiritually terrified of an accidental shove because it constituted leaving the better option.
Right. A deviation from perfection.
If they are that terrified of accidental, unintentional harm, what does that say about our modern comfort with intentional, minor ethical slips? We scroll past suffering without a second thought. We fudge the numbers on a report. We cut corners at work. We tell those small lies, and we sleep just fine at night. Maybe the real deep dive isn't just about vindicating Moses. Maybe it's about interrogating ourselves.
That is the ultimate question, isn't it? Are we sensitive to our own impact on the world? Or have we just become numb to the small ways we fail to choose the better option every single day?
Something to think about. Thanks for joining us on this investigation. It's been a heavy one, but I think a necessary one.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive. Stay curious.